What if your most beautiful love story became your most dangerous addiction? What if the person who saved your life also destroyed it? Today, we're diving into a story so raw and shocking that it will change how you think about love forever. This isn't about fairy tale romance. This is about what happens when two broken people find each other and nearly destroy everything in their path. Picture this: you're living your dream life, best-selling author, financial freedom, the world at your feet. Then your best friend gets terminal cancer. In that moment of crisis, you both confess a secret you've hidden for 15 years. You're madly in love with each other. Sounds romantic. It becomes a nightmare. If you've ever loved someone so intensely it scared you, if you've ever enabled someone's destructive behavior because you couldn't bear to lose them, if you've wondered where helping ends and hurting begins, these next 45 minutes will shake you to your core. We're about to explore 10 brutal lessons about codependency, addiction, and the thin line between love and obsession. You'll discover why good intentions can lead to devastating consequences, how money becomes a weapon of control, and why sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away. This story will make you uncomfortable. It should, because it reveals truths about love that most people are too afraid to admit. By the end, you'll understand the difference between love and addiction, between helping and enabling. Most importantly, you'll recognize these dangerous patterns before they destroy your own relationships. Let's begin this journey into the darkest corners of the human heart and discover what real liberation looks like. Chapter 1. The Dangerous Beauty of SOULMATE Friendships. What if the friendship you treasure most is secretly the love of your life? And what if realizing this could either save you or destroy you both? Everyone has that one friend who just gets them. The person you call first with news. When you're together, you feel like your truest self. You call them your soulmate, but platonically, right? Here's what nobody talks about. The deepest love stories often disguise themselves as friendships for years. Two people create intimacy so profound it transcends typical friendship, yet neither dares name what's happening. Neuroscience reveals something shocking. Your brain can't distinguish between different types of deep love. Whether romantic, platonic, or undefined, the same neurochemical pathways activate. The oxytocin, dopamine sense of safety, it's identical. This explains why some friendships feel more essential than family, more important than romance. You're not imagining it, you're experiencing one of humanity's most powerful connections. In this story, two women spent 15 years as best friends while secretly, unconsciously falling in love. Neither could risk naming it because losing the friendship would devastate them. So they built a beautiful, safe bubble until reality shattered it. Then came the phone call, terminal cancer. 6 months to live. When someone you love is dying, you can't hide behind just friends anymore. Both of us were secretly in love with each other and had slowly fallen in love over a decade and a half, she later confessed. The cancer became the catalyst that forced them to stop pretending. But here's the terrifying reality. Confessing love to a dying person is like lighting a match in a room full of gasoline. Beautiful? Yes. Catastrophic? Absolutely. Let me paint the picture. Raya was the Syrian-born hairstylist who could tame impossible hair and wild hearts. She was recovery strong, having beaten heroin and cocaine addiction. She brought authenticity to a world of literary success and public personas. Their friendship had rituals, marathon phone calls, creative collaborations, showing up for each other's chaos. When Raya wrote her memoir about addiction recovery, Liz wrote the introduction. They were creative champions and emotional anchors. But underneath was something neither would name. They were falling in love. Not dramatic, sweep-you-off-your-feet love, but the slow, steady kind that grows from truly seeing someone's light and shadows. The results? 15 years of the deepest friendship either had experienced, built on a foundation they refused to examine. Look at your relationships right now. Is there someone who feels like home? Someone whose opinion matters more than others? Someone you think about when you wake up and before sleep? Use the inner circle test. List the 5 people you're most comfortable being vulnerable with. Notice if someone on that list affects your mood disproportionately. Notice if there's someone you think about more than seems normal. The key is recognizing that profound emotional bonds don't always announce themselves dramatically. Sometimes the most significant relationships develop quietly, beneath conscious awareness. The deeper reality is that authentic recognition is rare. When you find someone who truly sees you light and shadows, you don't just gain a friend, you discover hidden parts of yourself. This connects to understanding that love isn't always romantic. Sometimes love is recognition, acceptance, the profound comfort of being known. People describe these bonds as finding their other half, not romantically, but soul-deep. Research shows these connections can be as life-changing as any romance, creating foundations for either beautiful growth or devastating codependency. Identify your person, the friend most essential to your well-being. Write what makes this relationship special. Notice hidden feelings or dependencies. This awareness helps navigate the line between healthy connection and dangerous attachment. Chapter 2. When Love Becomes Addiction, the $500,000 Mistake. What happens when unlimited money meets unlimited desperation? When someone you love is dying, and you have the resources to buy them anything except more time. Money can't buy happiness, but it can definitely purchase destruction. Especially when you're a newly minted millionaire who doesn't know how to process sudden wealth, and the person you love most is slipping away. When someone we love is dying, our brains enter survival mode. Logic disappears. We become desperate to prove our love, to make their remaining time perfect, to somehow buy our way out of grief. Add sudden wealth to this equation, and you create a perfect storm. It's like the universe was driving dump trucks into my backyard and dumping cash, she describes. Nothing in my life had prepared me for how to process that. This is where love becomes addiction. Not addiction to a person, but addiction to the feeling of being needed, of being the rescuer, of having the power to make someone's pain disappear, even temporarily. Picture this: your partner has 6 months to live. Money is no object. What do you buy someone who's dying? A Range Rover, a piano, a Rolex, Prada boots, a penthouse apartment in their favorite neighborhood, not because they asked for these things, but because spending money felt like loving them. I've always been bananas extravagant like this when I'm in love, she admits. But this wasn't romance, this was panic masquerading as generosity. The Range Rover sat unused because Rhea was too sick to drive. The piano gathered dust because her hands were too weak to play. The expensive apartment became a prison where addiction would flourish. Each purchase was really a desperate attempt to answer the question, how do I prove I love you when nothing I do can save you? Here's what nobody tells you about sudden wealth. It can become a weapon of control disguised as love. When you have unlimited resources, you stop asking, what do you need? And start assuming, I know what you need. The gifts weren't really about Rhea's happiness. They were about the giver's need to feel useful, powerful, essential. Classic codependent behavior amplified by financial resources. This pattern appears everywhere. Parents buying their adult children's love, spouses using money to avoid difficult conversations, friends who always pick up the check to maintain their role as the generous one. Ask yourself these uncomfortable questions. Do you use money to solve emotional problems? Do you spend on others when you feel insecure about the relationship? Do you feel more valuable when you're paying for things? Warning signs include always being the one who pays, giving expensive gifts when you sense distance, feeling anxious when you can't spend money on someone you love, using phrases like, let me take care of this, as your default response to others' problems. The deeper issue isn't generosity. It's the belief that your worth depends on what you provide rather than who you are. Money became a substitute for presence, for honest conversations, for accepting powerlessness. Instead of sitting with the reality of terminal illness, there was shopping. Instead of processing grief, there was spending. The financial cost was enormous, but the emotional cost was devastating. Every purchase postponed the real work of accepting loss, of being present with pain, of learning that love sometimes means doing nothing except witnessing. Examine your relationship with money and love. When do you spend money on others? What emotions trigger your generosity? Notice if you use financial gifts to avoid difficult conversations or maintain control in relationships. Chapter 3. The moment everything changed: terminal diagnosis. How do you process the information that someone you love has 6 months to live? How do you hold space for death when you've spent your whole life running from pain? Terminal illness doesn't just happen to the patient, it happens to everyone who loves them. And sometimes the healthy person becomes sicker than the dying one. Picture getting the phone call that changes everything. Pancreatic cancer, liver cancer, 6 months, maybe less, your brain stops working normally. Time becomes precious and terrifying simultaneously. The person you've secretly loved for 15 years is dying, and you've never told them how you feel. Suddenly, all the reasons for staying quiet seem ridiculous compared to the reality of permanent loss. This is where many people make their biggest mistake. They think terminal illness is about death, when it's actually about truth. All the lies you tell yourself, all the feelings you hide, all the conversations you postpone, none of it matters anymore. Here's what happened in that hospital room. 2 people finally stopped pretending. "Let's just live," Raya said after the diagnosis. "Let's just be together." The confession came naturally then. "I'm in love with you. I'm in love with you too." 15 years of hidden feelings spilled out because death makes honesty urgent. But here's the dangerous part. Confessing love to a dying person isn't romantic, it's volatile. You're not just declaring feelings, you're taking responsibility for someone's final months. You're promising to walk them all the way to the river, their euphemism for death. She left her husband, rearranged her entire life, became a full-time caregiver to someone whose time was measured in months. In the same way that Raya had once discarded her entire existence for cocaine and heroin, I now discarded my entire existence for Raya. Notice that comparison addiction language used to describe love. This wasn't sacrifice, it was substituting one compulsion for another. The promise seemed noble, "I'll be there until the end." But promises made in crisis often become prisons built from guilt and desperation. What started as love became a different kind of addiction to being needed, to being the hero, to controlling an uncontrollable situation. When someone is dying, normal relationship rules disappear. You can't have typical arguments about dishes or money when death is looming. Everything becomes heightened, urgent, artificially intense. Crisis bonding creates relationships that feel profound, but are actually trauma-based. The intensity isn't love, it's shared fear dressed up as connection. This explains why relationships formed during crises often don't survive when the crisis ends. The bond was built on emergency, not compatibility. First, recognize that crisis doesn't suspend normal human psychology, it amplifies it. Your existing patterns become more extreme, not more pure. If you're a people pleaser, crisis will make you a martyr. If you need control, crisis will make you a dictator. If you avoid emotions, crisis will make you numb. The key is maintaining your identity while supporting someone else's journey. Ask, what does this person actually need versus what makes me feel helpful? Set boundaries even in crisis. I love you and I'm here for you, and I also need to maintain some aspects of my own life. Terminal illness brings out people's truest selves, both beautiful and ugly. The dying person may become more grateful or more bitter. The caregiver may become more compassionate or more controlling. Death doesn't automatically make people wise or relationships pure. Sometimes it just makes everything more intense and more complicated. The most loving thing you can do is accept that dying people are still human, capable of manipulation, selfishness, and poor decisions alongside courage and grace. If you're supporting someone through serious illness, regularly check in with yourself. Am I helping them or managing my own anxiety? Am I responding to their needs or my need to feel useful? Create support systems that allow you to process your own grief without burdening the dying person with your emotional needs. Chapter 4, Love in the Time of Relapse, When Recovery Fails. What do you do when the person you're trying to save doesn't want to be saved? When 17 years of sobriety crumbles in the face of terminal illness? This is where the fairy tale ends and the real nightmare begins. Because dying people don't always die gracefully, and sometimes loving them means watching them destroy themselves. Raya had been clean from heroin and cocaine for 17 years. 17 years of meetings, sponsors, recovery community. She was proud of her sobriety, it defined her identity. Then came terminal cancer, real physical pain, real emotional terror, access to unlimited prescription drugs through hospice care, and the oldest, most familiar escape route her brain knew. When she was faced with the real pain and real terror of her imminent death, she went back to that, Gilbert explains. She went to the oldest way that she knew to not feel emotional and physical pain. Here's the impossible situation. Your dying partner is using drugs. Do you call it addiction or pain management? Do you stage an intervention with someone who has 6 months to live? How do you have an intervention with a drug addict who's got a terminal cancer diagnosis? Gilbert asks. What do you say, like if you keep doing this, you're going to die? This is where love becomes enabling, where trying to help becomes participating in destruction, where good intentions create the worst possible outcomes. Picture this progression. It starts with prescription painkillers. Seems reasonable, she's dying, she's in pain. Then it's extra pills because the pain is worse. Then it's street drugs because the pills aren't enough. Soon you're registered with the city of New York as an active intravenous drug user so you can get clean needles. You're holding the light while your partner shoots up, tying off their arms and legs to help them find veins. Was this the lowest moment? Gilbert wonders. Or was it when I tied off her arms or legs for her while she shot up, watching over her carefully to make sure she had everything she needed? The person who never used drugs became a drug facilitator. The person trying to save someone became their dealer's assistant. Enabling isn't about weakness, it's about terror. Terror of abandonment, of being blamed, of losing someone's love. Enablers convince themselves they're helping when they're actually protecting their own fear. The lowest version of myself is an enabler who has no boundaries, who will do absolutely anything to be loved, who will pay for everything, who will just constantly try to be pleasing, who will allow herself to be abused. Notice the language, absolutely anything to be loved. This isn't about the drug user's needs, it's about the enabler's desperate need to feel essential. Rhea wasn't sleeping because cocaine addicts don't sleep. She wasn't letting her partner sleep either. She pushed away hospice workers, family, friends, anyone who might threaten the closed system of addiction and enabling. She had turned into somebody who is paranoid and abusive and aggressive, who also wasn't allowing anyone else to take care of her. The apartment became a prison where two people reenacted every toxic pattern they'd ever learned. The dying person became the abuser, the healthy person became the victim, and both called it love. Enabling doesn't require drug addiction. It happens whenever you protect someone from the consequences of their choices, when you make excuses for their behavior, when you sacrifice your well-being to manage their emotions. Signs you're enabling, you're more concerned about their problem than they are. You're working harder on their recovery than they are. You feel responsible for their mood, their choices, their consequences. The cruel irony. Enabling prevents people from hitting bottom, which is often necessary for real change. If you recognize enabling patterns in your life, start with this truth. You cannot save someone who doesn't want to be saved. Your job isn't to prevent their pain, it's to love them without losing yourself. Set boundaries even with dying people. I love you and I won't participate in your self-destruction. Sometimes the most loving thing is refusing to help. Chapter 5, the DARKEST thought, when love considers murder. What happens when love becomes so desperate that murder seems merciful? When you're so broken that killing someone feels like saving them? This is where we venture into the darkest territory of human psychology, the moment when a caregiver considers ending the suffering by ending the life. Picture this scene. Your partner is nodding off while smoking in bed, setting things on fire. They're paranoid, abusive, aggressive. They won't sleep, won't let you sleep, won't accept help from anyone else. You're both in hospice care territory. She has access to unlimited drugs legally, plus whatever street drugs she can acquire. You're both spiraling into a hell that has no exit strategy. Then your brain, exhausted and desperate, whispers the unthinkable. What if I just helped her die faster? I considered killing Rhea by giving her a combination of sleeping pills and fentanyl patches, Gilbert confesses. I could see no other way out. It felt like the degree of my insanity was such that it seemed like a really good idea in that moment. This wasn't about mercy killing or assisted suicide. This was about a person so broken by caregiving that murder seemed like problem solving. This is what happens when someone with codependency issues meets an impossible situation. Caregivers who lose themselves in someone else's illness often experience thoughts of escape that terrify them. Sometimes that escape fantasy involves the other person disappearing through cure, through leaving, or through death. The shocking part isn't that she thought about it, it's that in her exhausted, traumatized state, it felt reasonable. Here's what drives people to these dark thoughts: the illusion that they can control an uncontrollable situation. When every attempt to help fails, when every boundary gets crossed, when every day brings new chaos, the mind seeks any form of control. Murder feels like control. It feels like ending suffering. It feels like solving an unsolvable problem. But really, it's the ultimate expression of powerlessness, the fantasy that destruction is easier than acceptance. She had the plan, sleeping pills and fentanyl patches both available through hospice. It would look like an accidental overdose. The suffering would end. The chaos would stop. The degree of my insanity was such that it seemed like a really good idea, she remembers. Not evil, not cruel, logical. That's how broken her thinking had become. What stopped her? Not moral clarity or sudden wisdom, simple exhaustion. She was too tired to follow through. Sometimes we're saved by our own depletion. This story reveals something terrifying about caregiving. Helpers can become dangerous when they lose themselves completely in someone else's crisis. The person who sacrifices everything for someone else's well-being can develop a twisted sense of ownership over that person's life and death. I'm doing everything for you, so I should control everything about you. This is why caregiver support is crucial, not just for the caregiver's well-being, but for the patient's safety. If you're caring for someone with serious illness or addiction, monitor your own mental health carefully. Warning signs include fantasizing about the person disappearing or dying, feeling rage toward them for being sick, believing you know what's best for them better than they do, feeling entitled to make decisions about their life because you're sacrificing for them. These thoughts don't make you evil, they make you human and overwhelmed, but they're signals that you need help immediately. If you recognize these patterns, reach out for professional support immediately. Caregiver burnout is real and dangerous for both people involved. Remember, you cannot pour from an empty cup. Taking care of yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary for everyone's safety. Chapter 6, The Breaking Point, When Love Walks Away. What does it take for someone who promises to stay until the end to actually leave? When does love become self-preservation? Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is admit you're not strong enough. Sometimes saving yourself is the only way to save anyone. After months of enabling, sleepless nights, and escalating abuse, she faced an impossible choice. Stay and potentially die alongside Rhea, or leave and live with the guilt of abandoning someone who's dying. I was at the end of myself, and she was at the end of herself. It was a situation that had become the very definition of unmanageable. This is where fairy tale notions of unconditional love meet brutal reality. Unconditional love doesn't mean accepting unlimited abuse. It doesn't mean sacrificing your life for someone who's destroying theirs. The breaking point came when she realized she was no longer helping. She was participating in mutual destruction. Two people drowning together don't save each other, they just sink faster. Both of our rock bottoms collided, she describes. The most degraded version of Rhea was a low-bottom opioid and cocaine addict who became very manipulative and abusive. The lowest version of myself was an enabler who has no boundaries. Sometimes clarity comes not as wisdom but as exhaustion. When you literally cannot continue the same patterns anymore, change becomes inevitable. Leaving someone who's dying isn't like ending a normal relationship. You can't just pack up and disappear. You have to arrange alternative care, navigate family dynamics, and live with the knowledge that this might be goodbye forever. She arranged for Rhea's family to take over care. She stepped back from the daily chaos while still maintaining emotional connection. It wasn't abandonment. It was recognizing that her presence had become harmful rather than helpful. The guilt was crushing. Society tells us that love means staying no matter what. But sometimes love means admitting you're not equipped to handle someone's journey. Leaving someone during crisis triggers our deepest fears about being selfish, heartless, or weak. But there's a difference between abandonment and boundaries. Abandonment is leaving someone without support. Boundaries are removing yourself from a situation while ensuring they have other resources. The cruel irony? Sometimes people get better when their enablers leave because they're finally forced to take responsibility for their own choices. Here's what happened when she left. Rhea was forced to engage with hospice workers, family members, and other support systems. The closed loop of addiction and enabling was broken. Did Rhea get clean? No, but she stopped being as isolated and secretive about her drug use. Other people could see the reality and make their own decisions about how to help. Meanwhile, the caregiver could sleep, eat, and remember who she was outside of crisis management. This wasn't selfishness, it was survival. Signs it's time to step back from caregiving. You're having thoughts of harming yourself or the other person. Your health is deteriorating. You're enabling destructive behavior. Other people can't help because you're controlling all access. The hardest part is distinguishing between temporary overwhelm, which requires support, and fundamental incompatibility with the caregiving role, which requires stepping back. Ask yourself, is my presence helping them or helping me feel needed? Often, we stay not because they need us, but because we need to feel essential. Leaving brought enormous guilt, but also enormous relief. The constant crisis was exhausting. The hypervigilance was destroying her nervous system. The enabling was destroying her moral compass. I had to save my own life, she realized. Not from physical danger, but from becoming someone she didn't recognize, someone capable of murder, enabling, and complete self-destruction. If you're in a caregiving situation that's destroying your well-being, ask, what would I tell a friend in this situation? Often, we give others permission we won't give ourselves. Consider, can you help this person while maintaining your own health and boundaries? If not, stepping back might be the most loving choice for everyone involved. Chapter 7. The Final Goodbye: Death Without Reconciliation. How do you say goodbye to someone when your last memories together are toxic? When love ends not with resolution but with mutual destruction. This is the reality nobody talks about. Sometimes people die before relationships are healed. Sometimes love stories end with more questions than answers. 18 months after the diagnosis, 6 months after walking away, she got the call. Rhea was dying, not someday today. All the anger, the boundaries, the self-preservation suddenly felt insignificant compared to the reality of permanent loss. This is the moment when you realize that being right doesn't matter if the person is gone forever. Do I go? Becomes the question that defines everything. Do you show up for someone who became abusive? Do you risk your own recovery to be present for their death? She went because despite everything, the enabling, the abuse, the mutual destruction, love doesn't disappear just because it becomes toxic. But this wasn't a Hollywood deathbed reconciliation. There were no profound last words, no forgiveness scenes, no neat closure. Just two exhausted people who had loved each other and hurt each other in equal measure. Death doesn't automatically make relationships pure, she reflects. It just makes them final. Movies show us peaceful deaths where everything gets resolved. Reality is messier. Rhea died as she lived in those final months, complicated, difficult, human. There was no dramatic forgiveness scene. No moment of clarity where everything made sense. Just a person dying too young from cancer, having spent her final months battling demons that ultimately won. The woman who had promised to walk her all the way to the river wasn't holding her hand when she crossed over. Sometimes love means accepting that you're not the right person for someone's final journey. Here's what nobody talks about. Sometimes when difficult people die, you feel relief alongside grief. This creates crushing guilt. How can you be relieved that someone you loved is dead? But relief doesn't mean you didn't love them. It means the situation had become unsustainable for everyone involved. The relationship was killing both of you. Death ended that mutual destruction. Grief became complicated by guilt, relief, regret, and anger. This isn't bad grief, it's honest grief for a complicated relationship. Could she have done something different, stayed longer, left sooner, been stronger, more patient, less enabling? The torturous thing about losing someone after a toxic period is that you'll never know. Death ends the story before resolution is possible. These questions can consume you if you let them. The work of grief becomes learning to live with uncertainty, with loose ends, with relationships that ended badly. Rhea's death forced a reckoning with reality. Love isn't always enough. Good intentions don't guarantee good outcomes. Sometimes two people bring out the worst in each other despite caring deeply. This doesn't diminish the love they shared for 15 years. It doesn't erase the beauty of their friendship or the authenticity of their connection. It just acknowledges that love exists within human limitations. Rhea's death became the catalyst for honest self-examination. Without the daily crisis to manage, without someone else's addiction to focus on, she had to face her own patterns. After she died, I started on my own path to recovery, she admits. Sometimes we can only see our own issues clearly after the chaos ends. The grief wasn't just for Rhea, it was for the person she herself had become during those final months. The enabler, the controller, the person capable of considering murder. That version of herself had to die too. If you've lost someone after a difficult period, allow yourself the full range of emotions. Guilt, relief, anger, sadness, they can all coexist. Don't try to sanitize the relationship in death. Honest grief acknowledges both the love and the toxicity. Consider, what did this relationship teach you about your own patterns? Sometimes the most difficult relationships are our greatest teachers. If you're grieving a complicated relationship, write 2 letters. One expressing all your anger and hurt, another expressing all your love and gratitude. You don't have to send them, just acknowledge the complexity. Remember, you can miss someone and still be glad the chaos is over. Both things can be true. Chapter 8. The Awakening, Recognizing Your Own Addiction. What happens when the person you were trying to save dies, and you realize you were the one who needed saving all along? Sometimes it takes losing everything to discover who you really are underneath all the rescuing, controlling, and people-pleasing. After Rhea's death, the chaos stopped. No more crisis to manage, no more addiction to enable, no more emergency to justify extreme behavior. Just silence and the uncomfortable question, who am I when I'm not saving someone? This is when the real work began. Without someone else's drama to focus on, she had to face her own patterns. The enabling, the financial control, the need to be needed, these weren't loving behaviors. They were addiction symptoms. I recognize now that I too am an addict, she admits. For me, it's sex and love and codependency. Love addiction isn't about loving too much. It's about using relationships to avoid yourself. It's the compulsive need to be in intense emotional situations because normal life feels empty. I get so swept up in somebody that I actually kind of lose my brains and wake up similar to the way that a blackout alcoholic would wake up months later and be like, "Oh my God, what just happened to my life?" Notice the language, lose my brains, blackout, wake up. This isn't romantic passion, it's compulsive behavior that bypasses conscious choice. Looking back, she could see the pattern across multiple relationships. The intense beginning where she would discard her entire existence for someone new. The lavish spending to prove love. The boundaryless giving that felt generous but was actually controlling. With Rhea, in the same way that Rhea had once discarded her entire existence for cocaine and heroin, I now discarded my entire existence for Rhea. The parallel is clear. She was using love the way Rhea used drugs. Both were ways of escaping reality, avoiding difficult emotions, and maintaining the illusion of control. Real love enhances your life. Addictive love consumes it. Real love respects boundaries. Addictive love violates them. Real love accepts reality. Addictive love creates fantasy. In healthy relationships, you remain yourself while growing together. In addictive relationships, you lose yourself in service of the intensity. The test: does this relationship make you more yourself or less yourself over time? Codependency feels virtuous because it looks like selflessness, but underneath the helping is often a desperate need for control and validation. The lowest version of myself is an enabler who has no boundaries, who will do absolutely anything to be loved, who will pay for everything, who will constantly try to be pleasing. Notice, absolutely anything to be loved. The helping isn't about the other person's needs, it's about earning love through usefulness. Codependents often choose partners with problems because problems create opportunities to feel needed. The chaos becomes addictive because it provides purpose and identity. Real recovery meant admitting that her loving behaviors were often controlling and harmful, that her generosity was sometimes manipulation, that her devotion was actually compulsion. This is harder than recovering from substance addiction because society celebrates codependent behavior as loving and selfless. She began attending 12-step meetings for love addiction, learned about boundaries, and started the work of discovering who she was without someone to save. Signs of love addiction: you feel empty when not in a relationship. You're attracted to people with problems you can fix. You lose yourself in relationships. You use money, sex, or caretaking to maintain connection. You might be addicted to love if you can't imagine life without romantic drama. You feel more alive during relationship crises. You define your worth by how much you give to others. The cruel irony. Love addicts often end up with people incapable of healthy love, creating the very rejection they fear most. Recovery from love addiction means learning to be alone without feeling empty. It means building a life so fulfilling that you don't need someone else to complete it. It means choosing partners based on compatibility rather than chemistry. It means helping others without losing yourself. It means loving without owning. Pick one of those slogans you're rolling your eyes at and marry it, she was told in meetings, the one that saved her, one day at a time. Because the only place she was safe from compulsive behavior was right now. Examine your relationship patterns honestly. Do you tend to lose yourself in relationships? Are you attracted to people who need fixing? Do you feel empty when single? If you recognize these patterns, consider, what would change if you built a life so fulfilling that relationships enhanced it rather than completed it? Chapter 9. The Haunting When the Dead Don't Stay Dead. What happens when someone dies but won't leave your mind? When grief becomes a different kind of relationship with someone who's no longer there. Sometimes death isn't the end of the relationship. It's just a change in the rules of engagement. After Raya's death, something unexpected happened. She didn't disappear. Not literally, but in dreams, in moments of decision-making, in a presence that felt as real as when she was alive. Gilbert writes about being visited by the ghost of her partner, Raya, with an openness that avoids sensationalism, critics noted. This wasn't horror movie haunting. It was the way deep relationships continue even after death. Some people would call this imagination, projection, or wishful thinking. But for someone grieving a complicated love, these visits became part of processing what couldn't be resolved in life. Modern grief research challenges the old notion that healthy grief means letting go and moving on. Instead, it suggests that we maintain continuing bonds with people who die, internal relationships that evolve over time. This is especially true for complicated relationships. When someone dies before conflicts are resolved, the psyche continues working on those issues internally. The conversations with Raya became a way of processing guilt, seeking forgiveness, and gradually healing what couldn't be healed while she was alive. In moments of major decision-making, she found herself asking, what would Raya say? Not because she believed in literal communication with the dead, but because their relationship had become internalized. Raya had been the friend who encouraged authenticity, who challenged pretense, who called out bullshit with loving directness. Even in death, that voice remained available as internal wisdom. This is how we carry people forward, not as frozen memories, but as living influences that continue shaping our choices. Unhealthy continuing bonds keep you stuck in the past, unable to form new relationships or make independent decisions. Healthy continuing bonds integrate the person's influence while allowing you to grow beyond the relationship. The question becomes, are these visits helping you heal or keeping you trapped? Are you using the connection to avoid moving forward or to gather strength for the next chapter? Gradually, the conversations with Raya shifted from seeking forgiveness to receiving wisdom. The guilt began transforming into gratitude for lessons learned through loss. Raya's death taught things her life couldn't. That love and toxicity can coexist, that good intentions don't guarantee good outcomes, that sometimes the most loving thing is walking away. These weren't lessons Raya deliberately taught. They were insights born from the wreckage of their relationship. Grief became creative fuel. She chronicles the blistering pace at which she wrote her last novel, City of Girls, a tale so joyful that nearly every review used the word sparkling to describe it. This is how some people process loss, by creating something beautiful from something broken. The pain becomes material for art, the lessons become wisdom to share. Writing became a way of honoring both the love and the loss, the beauty and the toxicity, the human complexity that can't be reduced to simple narratives. Healthy grief includes the full range of emotions: sadness, anger, relief, gratitude, confusion. It allows for complexity without requiring resolution. Unhealthy grief gets stuck in one emotion or refuses to acknowledge certain feelings. It either idealizes the dead person or demonizes them, missing the human truth that includes both light and shadow. The goal isn't to get over significant losses, but to integrate them in ways that allow continued growth and connection. If you're grieving someone with whom you had a difficult relationship, allow yourself the full emotional range. You can miss someone and still be angry with them. You can love someone and still be glad the chaos ended. Consider, what did this person teach you about yourself? How did they challenge you to grow? What wisdom emerged from the pain? Write letters to them expressing everything you wish you could have said. You don't need to believe they're literally receiving your words to benefit from expressing them. If you're carrying unresolved grief, spend time writing about both the positive and negative aspects of the relationship. Let yourself feel anger alongside love, relief alongside sadness. Ask, how can I honor this person's memory while also honoring my own growth? How can I carry their positive influence forward while leaving their toxicity behind? Chapter 10. Liberation, choosing yourself after choosing others. What does real liberation look like after a lifetime of losing yourself in other people? How do you build a life that doesn't require saving someone else to feel valuable? Sometimes freedom isn't about finding the right person to love. It's about learning to love yourself enough to be alone. After decades of relationships where she disappeared into other people's needs, she made a radical choice: celibacy. Not as punishment, but as exploration of who she was without the constant distraction of romantic drama. Gilbert reveals that her own path to health has included a commitment to a period of celibacy and financial sobriety, along with developing what she calls sober dating practices. This wasn't about rejecting love. It was about discovering what love looked like when it wasn't compulsive, desperate, or consuming. Love addicts often confuse solitude with loneliness because they've never learned to enjoy their own company. Being alone feels like punishment because they've only known themselves in relation to others. But solitude became the space where real self-discovery happened. Without someone else's emotions to manage, moods to monitor, or problems to solve, she had to face her own inner landscape. The surprising discovery: she actually liked herself when she wasn't performing for someone else's approval. Part of her recovery involved what she called financial sobriety, examining how she used money to control relationships and buy love. No more lavish gifts to prove devotion. No more paying for everything to maintain the role of rescuer. No more using wealth as a way to feel essential to others. This was harder than it sounds because generous spending felt like expressing love. Learning to love without spending required completely redefining what care looked like. The result: relationships based on genuine compatibility rather than financial dependency. Beyond financial sobriety came emotional sobriety, learning to feel feelings without immediately trying to fix, change, or escape them. One day at a time became her mantra, not just for avoiding destructive relationships, but for staying present with whatever emotions arose without immediately seeking someone else to regulate them. This meant sitting with sadness without calling an ex, feeling anxious without creating drama to distract from it, being bored without immediately seeking intense connection. When she eventually returned to dating, everything was different. Instead of seeking someone to complete her, she looked for someone to complement her already complete life. Sober dating meant getting to know people slowly instead of diving into intensity immediately, maintaining friendships and interests instead of disappearing into new relationships, choosing partners based on stability rather than chemistry. Most importantly, it meant being willing to walk away from connections that felt compulsive rather than healthy. I do love a description of 12-step as like it's a simple program for complicated people, she reflects. The slogans that once seemed cliché became lifelines. Pick one of those slogans that you're rolling your eyes at and marry it, an old-timer advised. One day at a time became her anchor because it kept her present instead of spiraling into past shame or future anxiety. Recovery taught her that intelligence doesn't protect you from addiction. If anything, smart people are often better at rationalizing destructive behavior. The biggest change was learning that boundaries aren't walls, they're bridges to healthier relationships. Saying no to enabling became saying yes to genuine love. This meant not rescuing adults from consequences of their choices, not using money to solve emotional problems, not losing herself in someone else's drama, not staying in situations that required her to become someone she didn't recognize. Boundaries felt cruel at first because she'd confused helping with loving, but real love often requires allowing people to face their own struggles. The goal wasn't to stay single forever. It was to build a life so fulfilling that partnership enhanced rather than completed it. This meant developing friendships, creative projects, spiritual practices, and personal interests that didn't depend on romantic relationships. When you enjoy your own company, you stop accepting poor treatment just to avoid being alone. Liberation isn't a destination, it's a daily practice of choosing yourself without abandoning others. It's loving people without losing yourself. It's helping without enabling. "We're just doing Wednesday today," became her approach to life. Not trying to fix everything at once, just staying present with today's choices, today's feelings, today's opportunities to practice healthier patterns. If you recognize patterns of losing yourself in relationships, start small. Spend one day a week completely alone, doing things you enjoy. Notice if this feels peaceful or panicked. Practice saying no to requests that require you to violate your own boundaries. Start building a life so rich that relationships add to it rather than define it. Remember, you can't give someone else what you don't have yourself. Learning to love yourself isn't selfish, it's essential for healthy relationships. Over the past 45 minutes, we've journeyed through one of the most brutally honest explorations of love, addiction, and liberation ever written. This isn't just a story about one relationship. It's a mirror reflecting the ways we all use love to avoid ourselves. Let's recap the 10 life-changing insights. The dangerous beauty of soulmate friendships that hide romantic love. How unlimited money becomes a weapon when mixed with desperation. The way terminal illness forces truth but doesn't guarantee wisdom. When recovery fails under the weight of real terror. The moment love becomes so desperate it considers murder. Why walking away sometimes saves everyone involved. How death without reconciliation teaches its own harsh lessons. The awakening that your loving behavior might be addiction. When the dead continue guiding the living. And finally, what real liberation looks like after a lifetime of losing yourself in others. This story shows us that love isn't always healing. Sometimes it's destructive. Sometimes two people bring out each other's worst qualities despite caring deeply. Sometimes the most beautiful connections become the most toxic relationships. Most importantly, this journey reveals that you cannot save someone who doesn't want to be saved. Your job isn't to prevent someone else's pain. It's to love them without losing yourself in the process. Here's what I want you to remember. Your struggle with codependency, with losing yourself in others, with using relationships to avoid your own inner work. These patterns can be healed. But healing requires the courage to face yourself when there's no one else's drama to distract you. The practices we've explored: emotional sobriety, financial boundaries, one day at a time, choosing yourself without abandoning others. These aren't one-time decisions. They're daily choices to love differently. Start small. Notice when you're trying to fix someone else's feelings instead of managing your own. Practice being alone without feeling empty. Remember that boundaries aren't cruel, they're necessary for real intimacy. By applying these principles, you're not just avoiding toxic relationships. You're creating space for authentic love that enhances rather than consumes your life. Your journey toward liberation starts now. Choose yourself. Not selfishly, but wisely. Not by avoiding love, but by learning to love without losing who you are. Sometimes the river of love leads to drowning. But sometimes, learning to swim in those deep waters transforms you into someone capable of both loving deeply and remaining whole.